The Man Whore podcast is sponsored by Alt Playground. APG is more than just a place to find couples to swap with. Alt Playground is a lifestyle community for all non-monogamous and sexually adventurous people to connect and share. And you know I started a profile. Join me over at altplayground.net. That's A-L-T playground.net. You always need new underwear, and you always love a good deal. Topic Wear is a luxurious undergarment brand that's partnered up with both myself and NBA star Serge Ibaka to leave your naughty parts soft and comfortable during this indefinite sexual off-season. Get 20% off your next order of undies with promo code MANWHORE at topicwear.com. That's code MANWHORE at topikwear.com. Now let's get to the show.
Welcome to the Man Whore Podcast.
Shout out to all the Polly Pockets, cucking couples, and non-mananimals. This is Billy Procida, and you are listening to the Man Whore Podcast. Non-mananimals. I think that kind of work. I tried with that one. Hi, everybody. How you doing? This week, everybody, and next week, we got a two-parter. My conversation with Franklin Veaux, the one of the co-authors of the book More Than Two. And oh boy, are we going to talk about him and all the stuff going on around him in a little bit. But first, well, there's really only one date that really matters, and it's July 3rd. That one was my and Megan's anniversary. Woohoo! Billy kept another one around for a whole year. Look at me. Yes, last weekend, Megan and I, a.k.a. Miss Giggles, we celebrated a full year of me not fucking this thing up. And it was quite lovely. Shout out to all the Instagram folks who showed us some love. Right before recording this, I was actually setting up and listening to my brand new record player. I have records now. I mean, they're records that used to belong to my mom that I found in an attic, but I have records, and now I have a thing to play them on. I am told that my mom's record collection is quite good, even though we couldn't salvage everything from the attic. Oh gosh, this will break some of y'all's hearts. So I go up to the attic because I was asking my mom if she had records, and she's like, I do, but they're somewhere in the attic. I don't know. I go up there. I find the box. I ignore all the mouse droppings, and I take them out. And we're going through them in Megan's record player just to test out which ones are too far gone and which ones are still good to go. And, oh gosh, this was heartbreaking. My mom had an original Beatles White Album, but the vinyl was so far gone, unplayable. I've heard such great things about this band, the Beatles. I was so looking forward to listening to one of their tunes. Luckily, she had some other really dope stuff. She got the Van Halen. She had the Bruce Springsteen live at Asbury Park. She got Blondie. She had as Megan referred to it when she was going through the record collection. She was like, "Hey, Bobby's got a lot of people of color in her records. Good for her." My mom's in her late 50s. Okay, we didn't know what her sensibilities were. No, I was in my favorite record to find in that box was an OG soundtrack vinyl of Rocky Horror Picture Show. And you know that was the first one I played. Still waiting to interview Susan Sarandon. She's always invited. She dressed up for me. We went out for a really, really nice steak dinner. We watched The Hamilton. We had some good-ass anniversary sex that rocked my world. We shared how much we mean to each other. I wrote her a nice little haiku. She says she falls in love with me more and more every day. Should I believe her? I think so. Before we get to this week's guest, the controversial Franklin Veaux, before I get canceled and told I'm a terrible human being for talking to him, I wanted to read a couple of your emails that would counter that opinion. that say I've maybe done a couple decent things. Okay. / I just like reading your emails. This one comes from Jared. The title is EP 298. For those of y'all who don't remember, EP 298, that was with comedian Rachel McCartney. He writes, "Hey, Billy, finally catching back up on the pod. Loving it, but wanted to write you about this episode. Just wanted to say thanks for constantly sticking up for the bi people and those discovering their sexuality. As a bi dude, listening to this episode was rough. Even with her saying that bi women are real a couple times, she came off as really dismissive and insensitive. She has the same opinion I have seen many, many times from the gay and lesbian community. I honestly think they might be the worst when it comes to biphobia and bi-erasure. Also, just because a bi person doesn't want to have sex with you doesn't mean they aren't bi. That's just such a toxic view, and I have 100% had sex with people I didn't want to just so I wouldn't have to defend the legitimacy of my sexuality again. If people are pretending to be bi, to be cool, or whatever, that's shitty, but for some people, figuring that shit out takes time. Anyway, thanks, man. I felt like I had you in my corner the entire time without you attacking her. Big props for that. Hope you're keeping safe, etc., etc. Regards, Jared. Sip. I am sipping whiskey out of one of my birthday presents from Megan, a pineapple sippy cup. Look, Jared, glad you felt backed up. You know, I'm glad you felt validated. You are valid by people, pan people, people who switch which word they use for themselves, either for clout or confusion. It's really just none of my business to tell you whether or not you're bi or gay or straight or whatever. All you bis, all you tries, all you straights, even the vanilla people, I'll back you the fuck up. Because, what you do and how you do it with whoever is none of my fucking business. Next email. Title is Binged Show, a Response. This comes from Robbie. He writes, Billy. I saw a Reddit AMA post from you about the podcast back in April of 2019. I had just gone into a couple podcasts and jumped straight into yours, immediately abandoning the others. Fuck yeah. I'm his primary podcast. Even if you don't believe in hierarchical structures, in podcasting, that's important. I just got all the way through to where there are no more episodes besides the ones on Patreon. So I just wanted to say that I really love the show and have a few thoughts after downloading 5+ years of your life in 1 year. First, you tend to shit on your early episodes. I think you've done a great job keeping a format, style, level of interest, quality of interview, etc. I couldn't call out any episode as being bad. Number 2, I disagree with a few minor things here and there, but I had to make a note to remind myself of episode 259 with Blythe Roberson. If you all don't remember, Blythe Roberson, she's a humor writer who wrote a book called How to Date Men When You Hate Men. It should come as no surprise based on the title of her book, but it was upsetting how she couldn't even hear you. You handled yourself well, but her lack of ability to empathize at all with the male perspective was bizarre and upsetting. For those who don't remember, then check it out. Her and I were talking about body image, and I was mentioning that men struggle similarly, though sometimes not as drastically. And I think she thought I was trying to equate them, and I was just trying to raise another topic, and there's a little butting of heads. It's fine. We're cool. He continues, only females. Ooh, we don't call them females, dude. I heard that using females as a noun ain't cool no more, but however, he does say males as a noun, so I'm gonna keep it in for now. Only females have problems, and males have the world handed to them, seemed to be her stance. She couldn't accept that you or other males ever had body issues. Okay. Number 3, it was slightly humorous to me to listen to show dates that were so far in the past for so long. Yeah, like imagine all of the gigs I had that you missed. Oh, how tragic. Also, remember live show events? Oh, I remember being booked for shows. That used to be fun. Next, he says, I must say, for all your podcast content and how well read you are on subjects relating to sex and love, I have to agree with your ex, Shay, that you are or were surprisingly inept at navigating through your own relationships. Ooh, dude came in with the hard hits. I don't know why all of a sudden I'm acting like a shock jock. I think I'm trying to overcompensate for crying earlier today. It's they, dude. Okay, they mentioned, I'm going to correct these. Okay, they mentioned that of all people, they thought they would be safe and would have a positive reaction to coming out to you. And you completely went off the deep end from the sounds of it. That could be chalked up to a lack of maturity, some area that needs some personal growth, or a gut reaction that maybe you regret later. Either way, it sounds like things are pretty healthy with Megan, so way to go. And if anyone wants to hear that episode with Shay, it's episode 280. Lastly, he says, look out for a Patreon donation. I'm pretty comfortable at $1 per episode, which would get close to $5 a month, especially when you release additional episodes. Well, then, man, I think you should double it to 10 a month because technically you're getting it's fine. I'm happy. Maybe that is what I'll settle on. I'm also planning a back payment to catch up for all the previous episodes, maybe on Venmo. And I do want to say this very kind angel of a human, he did in fact Venmo me $327. And fuck, I love this man. I think that is most of what I wanted to say after all this time. Keep up the good work, man. Robbie. Holy shit. You're one of fucking those. There's some of you freaks out there who y'all binge listen to my life so quickly, and I just think that's way too much Billy Procida Jr. Not for nothing, but God bless you for it. I'm glad you're digging the show. Thank you for the kind and constructive words, sir. One other thing that made me laugh was a little notification I got on Twitter. Some artist at Peak A Art tweets, there's got to be like a porn star podcast where they fuck their guest precast and then talk about it and other stuff in the show. And then at Dina Verge, shout out to Tyler, he responds, I mean, I basically assume that's what the Billy Procida is doing. And I'm just, I don't know, like that usually just happens after the podcast and then we never speak of it. But I like this spin-off podcast idea. If I have any porn star listeners, I mean, maybe that's an idea. Maybe that's my mini series into porn is I interview porn stars before we shoot something and then we talk about how mediocre I am afterwards. It's usable. Okay. If you want to send me your comments, your questions, your criticisms, your booby pictures, emphasis on criticisms after this episode, I'm sure, you can send all of that over to manwhorepod@gmail.com. And let's cleanse the palate with the fan whore appreciation moment. Okay. This is the part of the podcast where I like to give a few shout outs to the members of my fan whore community on Patreon. Patreon, of course, is a great way to support independent content creators like myself, especially through, such challenging times like right now. Artists are being crushed. I can't do a live podcast. I'm not allowed, and nor should I. But these wonderful, generous souls help make this show happen week in, week out. So right now I want to give a shout out to Jess. Oh gosh, Jess, you left, just right before the monthly Man Whore Munch. What are you doing? You're going to miss it. But we appreciate your support nonetheless. And a thank you to Pearly Sweet Cake, which is also her Instagram handle. And let me tell you, she's got that cake. Wait, what was that? Huh? That's an actual song lyric? I just thought it was being silly and stupid. Oh, maybe that's what that song is. Hey, Pearly Sweet Cake, thanks for being a member. Thanks for supporting the pod. People, go check out her Instagram. Hey. And you too can become a member for as little as $2 and enjoy some exclusive sex-positive discussion groups like our secret Facebook group, The Champagne Room, or our super naughty, dirty group chat, The Peep Show. You can become a member right now at patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. That's Patreon, Patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. Man Whore Podcast. Have you been craving? Have you been wanting? Have you been needing some man whore merch in your life? I think you do. And did you know that we've got quite a bit of it and it now lives in a whole new place? You can now get your Man Whore Podcast gear on the Man Whore Podcast Facebook fan page. Yes. Just head on over and search Man Whore Podcast. Go to the fan page and click that shop button and help yourself and load your cart up with some goodies. We got the I'm Saving Pegging for Marriage t-shirt. We've got the Stay Slutty panties. We got stickers, buttons. We got some good shit there, and we're going to be adding more. So there's a link in the show notes, or you can go to the Man Whore Podcast Facebook fan page, click the shop button, load up your cart. And now for this week's guest, Franklin Veaux. Franklin is one of the co-authors of the book More Than Two, a book about polyamorous relationships that he wrote with his former partner, Eve Rickert. And he's also written a memoir of his own. And, honestly, More Than Two, so many people in the non-monogamy world have read and found solace in and have found guidance and have found some really, powerful concepts and ideas. The New Testament of the Poly Bible, with the ethical slut being the Old Testament, right? Like, this is like one of the go-to books on poly, typically. And about a year and a half ago, Franklin, the poly guy, right? He got called out online publicly by his former partner, Eve. Some will say emotional abuse. I will at bare minimum say for being like just a really shitty poly boyfriend. Multiple women and people came out and joined Eve in that, in pointing out problematic patterns of behavior that Franklin may have as in dating. And normally, whatever, there are a lot of shitty boyfriends and partners in the world. However, Franklin co-wrote a book on this. Franklin, as you will hear him boast, has answered so many questions. He's had millions of views on Quora and LiveJournal, answering a lot of questions about dating, relationships, love, sexuality, polyamory. So when this thing happened, part of me went like, another idol fallen. There are no heroes, people. And then after the momentary schadenfreude, I did think like, this is why am I interested in this? Because if it was just some dude who got called out for being like not a great boyfriend, I'd be like, whatever. But I mean, like, dude, you co-wrote a book. That's my thought. I'm like, it's kind of like when Aziz Ansari got called out. Some will call what he did assault. Some might say just like a really fucking bad first date, and others will say in between. But Aziz, I think, wouldn't have been as much of a news item. I think that would have like came and gone if it was like Daniel Tosh. Because like our expectations for Daniel Tosh in the dating world and his relationship to women are kind of down here. Not criminal, but bad. But Aziz, it's like, dude, you wrote a book, and you wrote a book called Modern Dating. A book called Modern Dating that like covers consent. So you should be a little better at it if you're going to put a book out. So similarly, I think, well, like Franklin, you fucking, in my mind, I'm like, well, you wrote a book. You should be fairly decent at this poly thing. There was a blog put together, which there's a link to in the show notes of this episode. Now, to my rudimentary understanding, Eve asked for this woman, Louisa, who I guess was in the poly scene and had interviewed Franklin before, to interview these other people who were coming out with their stories about their relationships with Franklin and their issues with Franklin and their call outs on Franklin. And there's a link in the show notes, but this thing is like an impressive tome just in terms of the scale. There's a lot of fucking reading, and you can choose to do it and pause this podcast and come back later, or you can just go ahead. She's got these very extensive interviews with all these people, calling out similar patterns of behavior, enough to make you think that there's something here. And then there's also like a side spreadsheet that has all these like Quora posts and Facebook posts and tweets that are done like after it's kind of exhausting, but a little bit fascinating. Anyways, I was curious, and I happened to be on gearing up for my road trip. and I was going to be in Portland, which is where Franklin lives. So I reached out, asked if he wanted to come on the show, and he surprisingly agreed. I thought he would instantly say no or not even respond, but I was like, all right, I got the interview. I was thinking on my drive up, which was like a 9-hour drive from San Francisco to Portland, I was thinking, what's my job here? I know I commonly say I'm just a comedian with a fuck show, and I try to like abdicate a lot of responsibility. And honestly, I don't think I have to be as responsible as, Diane Sawyer. However, I am going into something that's going to be a little testy for people and super testy for others. People who are let down by Franklin, who once admired him and his work. I'm, possibly ripping open a scab for his past partners who have already talked openly about this. Eve. So I'm like, okay, like I should definitely read this stuff. That was my prep. I had some conversations with two members of his Survivor pod, of his accountability pod. I talked to 2 people from there to get more insight. I talked to Louisa, who is the woman who put together this tome of, testimony and posts and all that stuff. And I talked to another friend who is good with transformative justice, restorative justice, and asked her, what she what she thinks I should do in this interview. But ultimately, I'm thinking, what's my job, right? I'm not a journalist. Like, my job is not to interrogate this guy. My job is not to get a confession or an apology or to get answers, right? I'm not supposed to get some sort of Jack Nicholson red alert moment like, you can't handle the truth. It's also not my job to teach the guy. One, who the fuck am I to teach anyone anything? But also, that's just like my job here. And I want to make this clear for people listening. My job is just to connect, to ask questions, and to get him talking. It is not my job to bring this thing into some sort of conclusion. So I don't do that. If it was my job to do that, I would do that, but it's not my job, so I don't do it. So if it sounds like I'm being chummy, if it sounds like I'm being nice to the guy, if it sounds like I'm being a civil human, yeah, I am. That's what I'm doing here. Other people's jobs might be to interrogate or to analyze or to whatever. That's just not mine. So I met up with Franklin in Portland, and I talked to him for over 2 hours. This is roughly the first hour of that conversation. Next week, you'll hear part 2. For those of you who want me to be tough on him and hard, let me remind you that I can't just yell at the guy as soon as he sits down. And trust me, in the first 10 minutes, there were times where I was like, you're being frustrating. But, I can't just fucking rail on the dude 5 minutes into this thing. Okay, we have a long way to go. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I will assure some of you that next week, there's a bit more pushback than you're going to hear this week. And for those of you thinking this in your head, let me address, I don't really believe in the whole platforming argument, at least not from my point of view. Maybe if you're, aiming at the CEO of Twitter or Facebook, that's a little different. But I don't believe in like someone who has a show shouldn't talk to a certain type of person because they maybe did bad things or that they're a bad person. I mean, ABC News is still they interviewed Bashar al-Assad and he's a fucking monster, right? We don't not talk to people we don't like or disagree with. But I also just don't believe in this idea that like I'm giving him a platform. It's, for the most part, for now at least, it's still an open internet. He has his own platform. He has the internet. He can start a podcast and do a thing too. So I'm not really like gifting him an audience. Not for nothing. His Korah questions have like millions and millions of views. And this podcast, I hate to, break this fourth wall. It's embarrassing, but I do not have millions and millions and millions and millions of views. Arguably he has a bigger platform than me. And then the other thought is that, am I only sharing his side of the story instead of the women and people who've spoken up about their experiences with Franklin and I did give that thought. But there's also this massive tome of testimonials. So these people's stories, the survivors' stories, have been told. They have shared them. They are public. I am linking to them in the show notes. Eve is always welcome on this podcast. I only didn't ask Eve to be on because I was not going to Canada and my schedule did not allow for me to take the extra time to go from Portland to Canada. But Eve, if you're listening, you are always welcome on this podcast. I would love to have you on next time you're in New York or I'm in Canada, whenever borders are open. So those are my thoughts on this episode, why I did this episode, some of the preparation I did for this episode. I appreciate that, Some people will not like that I'm talking to him. Honestly, I did a little poll on Instagram, and like a good chunk of you don't even know who this guy is. Frankly, I didn't even know who this guy was, until I found out about More Than Two. I say that as a not famous person. He's arguably, look, I'm saying that I'm calling someone not famous as someone who's not famous. I feel comfortable saying that. Anyways, here we go. This is the first part of my long, sometimes frustrating conversation with the co-author of More Than Two, the reluctant former poly expert, Franklin Veaux. The Man Whore Podcast is excited to be sponsored by altplayground.net, the key place for your next non-monogamous adventure. For many of you, we don't know when that next non-monogamous adventure is going to safely be, but it's never too soon to get started looking around, poking around, making connections. And APG is a great place to do it, okay? They've been around for years in the lifestyle scene. But let me tell you something. I've been poking around. This isn't your mom and dad's swinger site. However, your mom and dad are welcome on the site. APG is open to all sorts of non-monogamy, from swinging to hot wifing, polyamory, casually open relationships, and the gamut. And they're going to offer you the resources to learn more about this wonderful new world you might be entering. Or, help you with some new tips and tricks if you've been in the lifestyle for a couple decades. Things have updated, right? They've got wonderful sex-positive resources like their podcast corner and their video corner, right? And they're going to be, whenever live events do come back, they'll be highlighting some of the top sexuality conferences in the country in their new conferences module. All of this and more is available to you at allplayground.net. I know so many of you are always bugging me, like, where do I go? Where can we find a third? Where can we find another couple to swap with? Where can we find a party near us? And I'm telling you, it's going to be altplayground.net. So head on over there, make an account, altplayground.net. Come find me. And we thank APG for supporting the podcast you know and love. Okay, so we've got on Franklin Veaux, the co-author of the New Testament of the Poly Bible. So hey, let's go on over to our sponsor at hotmovies.com and let's search polyamory just to see what we find. And oh look, 33 matches. This is where you want to go to #PayForYourPorn, because they've got hundreds of thousands of movies from all of your favorite porn stars, from all of your favorite studios, with all your favorite porn categories. So when I search polyamory, look at that. Oh, we've got the polyamory series from the Erotica X Studios. We got polyamory volumes 1 through 4. We've got Real American Swinger Stories, volume 2. We've got Watching My Hot Wife and more. And one of the reasons I love hotmovies.com is not just because they've been cutting me some checks for the last couple of years, but it's also both an affordable and ethical way to #PayForYourPorn. You buy a bundle of minutes, it comes out to about 10 cents per minute, and they're going to hook you up with 20 extra minutes worth of credits on top of any package you sign up for when you use promo code MANWHORE at sign-up. And yes, that includes the free trial. Yeah, turn that 20-minute free trial into a 40. You know what to do. Go to hotmovies.com, use promo code MANWHORE, #pay for some of your porn, and hey, maybe email me and tell me what you watched. Hotmovies.com, promo code MANWHORE. Now let's get to the show.
I was in Atlanta before I was here, and then I was in Florida in Fort Myers, and then Tampa before I was in Atlanta.
Wait, where are you from though?
That's a complicated question.
I love complicated questions because it takes up more time than 10 seconds.
I was born in New Jersey.
You're a Jersey boy?
Well, I only lived there for a few months. When I was a very small infant, I moved out of New Jersey, taking my family with me. Mm-hmm. And then we went to Idaho. And then from there, we bounced all around the American Midwest for a while. Then when I went into high school, we went down to Florida. I was in Florida for forever, most of my adult life. Then I moved from Florida to Atlanta and Atlanta to here.
Well, Franklin Veaux, how are you feeling these days? How you doing?
That is also a complicated question.
That's in part why you're here. You seem to be a complicated person, with a lot of sway, or maybe formerly sway, in the polyamory world. And, I've only witnessed some of it from afar online and only in little pieces, like a tweet here, a tweet there. Yeah, it seemed like that you went through one hell of a 2019.
2018 and 2019 can really suck it. They were not good years for sure.
Mm-hmm. How are you feeling about all of it? Like, where are you at right now?
Where I'm at right now is a lot better than I was when all of this mess started, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't know what to say other than that.
I mean, so I don't know how much you're familiar with me. Have you, when I had reached out, had you heard of me before?
Only in passing. I am sorry to say I have never listened to your podcast.
That's okay. That's totally fine. Just sometimes within like the sex positive world, like, or in the sex educator world, someone will be like, "Oh, I think I've heard of you," and I'm like, "Well, it's either really good or really bad." Because I got into my own bit of drama about a little over 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and that was stressful for me.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't feel fun. And yours felt like it was a lot more personal because mine was with people I'd never, for the most part, never met. Yours was with a lot of past partners.
Or at least one past partner. And then, I'm not really sure exactly what's going on with the rest of that.
Well, I mean, do you not think that other partners have spoken to them?
I do. I do
yeah.
think that other partners have spoken.
Like there were some recordings, so it's
Yes.
like that would have been a very intricate ruse.
Yes. No, absolutely. I do believe that some of my past partners have spoken. I don't necessarily think that my memory of events doesn't necessarily align perhaps with what they are saying. So there's that.
Okay. So is the memory of what they're saying something you are open to finding an in-between with?
I am not going to say that I have all of the answers. Obviously, human memory is fallible, and I will say that I don't remember things the way they are currently being described. I will also say that I have done things myself that were really harmful to other people, particularly when my ex-girlfriend Eve Rickert told me to. So
it's nice to hear you say that. I mean, what do you think? What do you think you did that caused harm?
Well, for example, so I was involved with my ex-partner Eve for a number of years. We started a couple of businesses together. We wrote a couple of books together. She had an ex-girlfriend she broke up with. And after she and her ex-girlfriend broke up, her ex-girlfriend published a survivor story about being abused by Eve. She did not publish it as a call out to Eve. She did not name Eve explicitly, but she did say, I was abused. I was abused by a person who was prominent in the poly community, and here's some of the things that happened. And when that came out, Eve recognized that the survivor story was about her. And so what she did was she told me and another prominent member of the poly scene, a guy named Pepper, that's actually his name, Peppermint, that she wanted to silence her ex-girlfriend. So we got together. We were in Vienna on a book tour when this happened, and Pepper was giving a speech, a workshop actually, about abuse in intimate relationships and about how to respond to abuse allegations. And then immediately after that, we all went to lunch together, and we sat around the table and we talked about ways to silence Eve's ex-girlfriend, to get the abuse survivor story removed from the web, to deplatform Eve's ex-girlfriend so that nobody else would listen to her if she talked about being abused by Eve.
Like a little conspiracy of thieves in a coffee shop?
I believed at the time that what I was doing was the right thing to do. And I look back at that now, and I can't explain why I thought what I was doing was right.
So but what did you do? That sounds like something that that Eve may have done to one of her past partners to cause harm. But what is it that you believe you've done?
I supported Eve. I sat there in that meeting with Pepper and Eve, and the three of us, and there was another person there as well, Pepper's girlfriend, and I'm sorry to say that I don't remember her name. We talked about ways to discredit her girlfriend. But
this wasn't one of your partners, right?
This was not a partner of mine, no.
Right. So wait, so you don't think you've done some sort of harm one of your past partners?
I believe that I probably have hurt past partners, yes. Okay. I absolutely have. Like when I asked my ex-wife for a divorce, that unquestionably hurt her. So yes, I absolutely believe that there are things that I have done wrong with past partners. I have broken up with partners in situations where I did not give a lot of clarity about the fact that I was breaking up with them, which is really not okay to do. I tend to be non-confrontational, so I don't tell a partner, hey, I'm breaking up with you. I just kind of let things fade. And that really is kind of shitty, honestly.
Do you view yourself as non-confrontational only in real life, or do you think that extends to like online?
I tend to be pretty non-confrontational generally. And I won't say that's always true. I know particularly in the past, and particularly like, in the fairly far past, like the early days of LiveJournal, I was a lot more confrontational online than I am now.
Yeah. How so? As someone I'm currently getting over my confrontational instincts. I mean, part of the reason I got into big trouble was over like an impulsivity with my thumbs. So honestly, it's my thumbs are really the biggest assholes as part of me. And I was definitely a very confrontational person. I still am and working on that. I'm also somewhat younger than you, so I'm hoping I can maybe kind of get ahead of that and maybe faster. But how do you recognize yourself as having been confrontational online?
It started to change. So I used to be particularly abrasive if I thought somebody was saying something stupid or doing something stupid. And I mean, it's really easy when you're sitting behind a computer and you're not actually face to face with somebody to be all rah, angry typing. I started meeting more and more people that I was interacting with online. I started going to blog meetups. I started going to like one of the big places where I am active now is a site called Korah.
Okay.
And I started going to Korah meetups. And I started recognizing that these people that I was being all angry keyboardist at were actually real people, that they weren't just words on a screen. And when I started realizing that I was meeting these people, that I was interacting with them in real life, and that, some of them were becoming part of my social circle and my friends, these are people who deserve compassion.
And LiveJournal, you've been on LiveJournal a hella long time.
2001.
That's, the towers go down and you're like, I'm going to go on LiveJournal. That's, I mean, just for context, I was in 6th grade. What brought you, so you're like in your like late 20s, early 30s, I think, probably around then. So what brought you to LiveJournal? At the time?
This whole new thing called blogging that I had never seen before. There was a friend in my gaming group, and he was actually an old college buddy of mine, whose girlfriend had started a LiveJournal blog. And I was like, a blog? What the hell is a blog? What does that word even mean? And so they showed me LiveJournal. I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. And I started a LiveJournal account, and I started putting things on it, and I just kind of never stopped.
What were you putting on in the very beginning?
In the very beginning, I was just talking about things that were happening in my life. And then I started talking about my relationships. I started talking about things that I believed. I started talking about, I talk about science. I talk about movies, just basically anything that was going on in my life. There was never a theme to it. There was never any kind of consistent sort of, thematic overtone.
Well, when did poly start to become like a more, because poly eventually became kind of a theme over time. How does that transpire?
I actually started writing about poly on the web in the mid 1990s, so well before I was on LiveJournal.
Okay.
And I was making a website that was called zeromag.com, because the same buddy who had introduced me to LiveJournal, he and I also published a small press magazine back in the day that was called Zero Magazine. And so
magazine, people, for the children listening, was a thing you used to hold in your hands and read about celebrities.
Yeah, basically. Old school tech.
Yeah.
Dead trees.
Dead trees, printed stuff. We had these things called advertisements that didn't move. Yeah, it was a wonderful time.
Yes. Imagine YouTube only without any moving pictures.
Yeah, something like that.
But we published a small press magazine called Zero. So we put up a website for it that was called zeromag.com, which still exists. And each one of us put up a small page that was just about ourselves, because we were the two editors of the magazine. So I put up an about page and he put up an about page. And on my about page, I talked about polyamory. And then I wrote a couple of more pages about polyamory. And then I wrote like a glossary of poly terms. And then before I knew it, the site was like this site that you go to for polyamory. Oh, and there's something about some kind of magazine there too.
Well, the stuff you were putting on there, like how much of that was like your experience, or were you kind of like taking there weren't a lot of poly books. I think The Ethical Slut was maybe the only one.
Yeah, there were not a lot of poly books out there at the time.
So how are you even putting stuff out there with like, I guess, the terminology that maybe barely existed?
I was writing about my relationships, but I was writing about them in a very abstract way. I was writing about the lessons that I learned. So I was with a partner, my first wife. She and I were together for 18 years. Our relationship was non-monogamous for that entire time. We didn't have the word polyamory when we started.
This is the one who goes by Celeste.
Celeste, that's correct.
Just so I think it's just as a better practice. So let's just, if there are people that are in the blog, let's try to go with those pseudonyms. Just because, from my understanding, all of them are pseudonyms, except
they are all pseudonyms,
let's
but I don't remember all the pseudonyms.
Sure,
so.
and I'll try to cross-reference, but if you can remember them, we'll try to use those.
Yeah,
and if you don't know who I'm saying, just feel free to ask. If I say Amber and you're like, what? I'll try to clarify. I think that would be the better practice for us to do.
I remember Celeste and Amber. I don't remember what the other pseudonyms are. But yeah, Celeste and I were together for 18 years. She identified as monogamous, even though during that time she had other lovers and other boyfriends as well.
How did she identify as monogamous if she was being non-monogamous?
That is,
I know it seemed like she may have had other partners and all, but I mean, I assume you maybe instigated the non-monogamy part.
Oh God, no. She actually had an outside partner before I did. After we started dating,
okay.
She actually almost started dating my best friend right before she and I started dating, and it was very much a toss-up about which one of the two of us she was going to end up dating. And so after she and I officially started dating, she and he were lovers for years.
So you're on zero. You're on zero, and you're putting all this stuff about poly. You're in. I guess I'm just doing math. So I'm assuming like mid-20s, early 20s, in the mid-90s.
Mid-20s, yeah.
Yeah, mid-20s. So I mean, like, I remember the mid-90s and computers. I remember that was considered like a odd thing at the time. Like,
for sure.
Were you at social? Were you out and about? Like, why were you at home typing on keyboards instead? It wasn't the common thing at the time.
Oh yeah, I was also very social, and we had quite an active social life, Celeste and I. It was actually a lot of fun. But I was really into computers I got my first computer in 1977. So I have always been an early adopter. And I got into this whole, internet. Well, it wasn't even called the internet then, but I got into this whole computer networking thing when I went away to college in 1984. So back then it was still called ARPANET rather than internet. And then I started getting active on the web in 1992 and started actually learning how to do web design and teaching myself HTML in, I want to say 96-ish or so.
How'd you meet Celeste, by the way?
We met at a McDonald's. I kid you not.
I mean, just not for nothing. I would have warned you that like any relationship that meets at McDonald's will end in divorce. Probably also at McDonald's.
Well, that's not necessarily true. There are some awesome people that I met while I was working at McDonald's.
Oh, this is good. While you worked at McDonald's. Oh, yeah. Was she an employee or was she a customer?
No, she was an employee.
Okay. She was just like, hey, pass me those fries and give you a wink?
Yeah, something like that. It was actually... We didn't like each other at first. It was one of those movie things where, the two people hate each other when they first meet and then they sort of grow together. It was one of those.
We also see the falling apart.
Yes, exactly.
How old were you when you two got divorced?
We were together for 18 years and we got together when I was 19. So,
okay.
Yeah, whatever the math is.
Gotcha.
I am really bad with time. Yeah. Time and direction. My direction sense is a bit rubbish too.
Oh gosh. Tell me more about that.
If it wasn't for GPS, I would never be able to find my way anywhere. I can get lost in a neighborhood that I've lived in for years.
You can find your way through a whole page of code, but you can't like get your way around the block?
Bingo.
Wow, man. Gotta get out more.
Well, we can't be good at everything. And my direction sense has always been shit.
Yeah. I mean, can't be good at everything. Do you consider yourself good at dating? I don't. I don't know why she's still here. My girlfriend's in the other room. I don't know the origins of the show is that women would sleep with me, but they wouldn't date me. And I want to find out why, because like I wanted a relationship, because apparently I'm like professionally bad at dating. Like that's just to give you an idea. Like my brand is, I already accept that like I suck at this to an extent. It's from what I've read from your live journal stuff, like when I poked around a bit, it seems like, speaking from such a sense of authority, you believed yourself to be very good at dating.
I believe that I'm okay at a lot of things. I don't know if I would call dating one of them. I definitely don't think I'm an authority.
But you did write with a sense of authority. I mean, because I've read some of the things you've written, and they're almost. I mean, you were on a live journal giving advice to people, like answering questions. I
don't know that that's necessarily true. I call things the way I see them. Some people find the things that I say useful, and that's cool if they find them useful. I've had people say, "Oh yeah, this thing that you said, it was amazing." I'm like, "Oh, cool." Some people think that I'm full of shit, and that's cool too.
What drove you to these places? Because you were answering like a lot of questions. You have like like hundreds of millions of views on your posts on LiveJournal.
And on Korah, yeah. I go onto forums because I always have. I was using BBSs in the late 70s, so it's always been a part of my life. And like I said, some people find the things that I say useful, and that's cool. Mm-hmm. But I certainly would never say, "Oh yeah, you have to do it my way," because I'm the guy who tells you that I'm the authority or whatever.
You never like called someone like stupid for thinking that, for I guess like having a different point of view on there?
I won't say I've never called anybody stupid. I generally don't call people stupid. I think that there are ideas that work and ideas that don't. And I think that some ideas work for some people and don't for others. I certainly have called some ideas stupid. Like, for example, I think the idea that you shouldn't vaccinate your kids because vaccines cause autism is stupid.
We can definitely agree.
And I feel comfortable saying that's a stupid idea. I am not comfortable saying, "Oh, well, you should do your relationship this way, and if you don't, you're stupid."
Mm-hmm. Okay. When like the call out happened about a year ago, it's like multiple past partners coming out with their experiences, we'll just say. And for anyone who hasn't like read, Jesus, there's a lot to read. So I'll just skip ahead to a point where it's like, Franklin's not accused of any sort of like physical consent violations. I just want to like clarify that, because I think in this world, sometimes the language can get a little warped and we don't know what we're actually talking about. So we say like abuser, and 99% of people, you hear the word abuser, we have a image in our head, and that's not necessarily the image we're talking about. People are talking about more emotional abuse and things like that. How did it feel to read that, to get hit up with that? 'Cause it's not like they all hit you up privately to be like, "Hey, look, we had these issues." It's kind of like out of left field.
It was weird. It was like I fell through into an alternate reality. And I get it, because when we were all sitting around the table talking about Eve's ex-girlfriend, one of the strategies we talked about is, let's talk to other people and see if we can get them to say bad things about her.
To get them to say bad things, or to discover if there are other bad things?
We were definitely leaning toward get them to say bad things. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of parts to that. You seek out specifically people who you think might have bad things to say. You encourage them to say the bad things, and then you distort, spin, and exaggerate those bad things as much as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, he yelled at me once. He's an abuser, right? You go from a specific event, he did this one thing, to a character trait. He is this thing. And so a lot of it was that. A lot of it was very, very careful tailoring of the stories. I did read one of the stories where Celeste.
Are we still on the conspiracy of thieves with Eve, or are we back to your?
No, back to the stories that people were telling about me.
Because not for nothing. It would be disingenuous to suggest that and I read it, and look, trust me, I find people in this world to be not too sensitive, but on the more sensitive side of things. one of the people who is involved with that blog, suggested that emotional abuse is like just as bad as physical abuse. And I'm sorry, I just don't believe that. I'm not going to tell her she's wrong. I'm just going to say, like, I disagree. I will always believe that punching someone in the face is worse than, saying nasty words to their face. That's just me. That's just how I view the world. But that's not the case here. It's not like anyone said, no one in all of that stuff said, here's one action, therefore abuse. That was never the case. There was a lot of people sharing their stories, and from those stories, there were overlaps with different people that suggested like a pattern of behavior.
Well, like I said, I think a lot of the stories were very carefully tailored and very carefully sort of curated. For example, one of the stories that I do remember reading is Celeste was like, oh yeah, Franklin yelled at me on the phone. And that did happen. That is true. Okay. I did yell at her. I should not have done it. But it was also, stupid.
Yeah, that happens in relationships all the time. But like, I've definitely yelled at partners on the phone. I've had partners yell at me on the phone. I think we can all agree raising your voice in heated moments is something that happens in relationships. I think you're reasonable humans not going to just jump to abuse there.
But what's interesting about that particular story is that I found it telling because in the 18 years that we were together, that was like the time that I yelled at her. But what the story doesn't say, well, why did it happen? Right? Like, I don't yell at partners. This is not a thing that I do. So something strange must have happened there.
Sure, but at the same time, like, I would never bring up. I'll put it this way: of all the things I read, I never thought I would bring up the story about the one time you yelled at Celeste. That is, like I said, I think most people will agree that just happens. I don't fixate on that. I would fixate more on things like, like something that jumped out to me was the condom usage. That was something that personally jumped out to me because that's definitely something that I take seriously in my relationships and fluid bonding. I mean, my dick is kind of part of my job, so I try to take care of it. In a couple of the testimonies, it said that like you didn't want to use a condom with Elaine, I believe is the pseudonym, when you were fluid bonding with Celeste, but you didn't ask Celeste, and Elaine's like, well, if you asked Celeste, and you were like, yeah.
Well, so that's an example of the kind of careful tailoring that I'm talking about. And the reason that I bring up the yelling, and this is a very similar situation, I did yell at Celeste after we separated. And then when I was out of town on business, she broke into my house, stole a bunch of my electronics, and sold them all to buy a computer. And then I yelled at her. And things change when you have that context, right?
But again, to me, like, honestly, I never even focused on the yelling part.
Well, and the condom usage is a similar thing, right? Oh, Franklin didn't want to use a condom. Well, that's really disrespectful and irresponsible of him.
Only disrespectful and irresponsible in the context of I'm married to someone I'm fluid bonded with and I have not cleared with them not using condoms with this person over here first. That's the only context. If someone wants to be irresponsible with their dick, like, that's your dick to be irresponsible with. I find it to be a problem when it involves other people.
Yep. And I think that is completely reasonable. And Elaine and I had exchanged emails and we talked about, some of the things that we wanted to do together, which I believed indicated that she was okay with not using condoms. And I mean,
it seemed like even in the story that Elaine was okay with not using condoms. I'm talking about Celeste.
And then I went to Celeste after those emails and I was like, okay, these are the things that I'm thinking about doing with Elaine. And I had thought that, when I described the things with Celeste that I was thinking about doing with Elaine, that it was clear that this was the case. And she had a different idea about that. So, then, Elaine and I spent time together and then this happened. And then Celeste was like, oh my God, you didn't use condoms. I was like, yeah, I had thought we discussed that. And obviously we didn't. And so I learned from that. And one of the things that I took forward from that experience was I never want to do this again, ever.
Sure.
Like, I believed that Celeste and I were on the same page. I was wrong.
All right.
I screwed up. I owned it. I apologized to Celeste for it. And I said, this will never happen again. And all of my relationships since then, I have always been extremely clear, not only with the person that I'm having sex with, but with everybody in my network, not just my other lovers, but also their other lovers, because I want to make sure this screw up never happens again.
So it sounds like you learned from an experience and tried to do better moving forward.
Exactly.
So was there anything from all the stuff that you read last year that you were like, yeah, I mean, and I'm not talking small things like I yelled at, Celeste on the phone once. I'm talking like, is there anything you saw there where you had to take a step back and go, okay, like I need to take and then maybe have since improved for the relationships you're currently in?
Well, since all of this has started, I have done quite a lot of work to try to make sure that, number one, did I do anything wrong? Number two, if I did do anything wrong, how can I make sure it doesn't happen again? So, for example, since all of this started, I've started seeing a therapist.
Oh, good for you, man.
Yeah. And I wanted to make sure that this was a therapist who is not a cishet white dude.
Okay.
So
What informed that decision?
Because I didn't want to run the risk of having somebody just echo back to me and say, "Oh yeah, you're just a normal dude. You're totally okay." I want somebody who's going to call me on my shit. I want somebody who's not going to let me get away with anything, right? Mm-hmm. And I want somebody who's actually there to help me be a better person. And so I deliberately looked for a therapist who I believed, number one, would have a point of view that was different from mine. And number two, would call me on my bullshit if I tried to do any bullshit.
Do you feel like the people I don't like saying Survivor Pod because not everyone involved in it was like that, but just the people involved in the call out, whether it's the blog folks, the ex-partners, Reed, whoever, like, do you feel like there were people there who genuinely wanted to call you on your shit, help you be a better Franklin?
I think there are people who told themselves that.
Okay.
From what I've read and from the things that have happened since, I don't believe that is actually the goal.
What do you think the goal is?
That's complicated. I think that Eve wants to discredit me, and I think that Eve wants to isolate me from my social group. And the reason that I say that is that when I left Eve, I started to come to terms with something that I really was not willing to admit during the years that we were together, which was that she was mistreating me. Why didn't you want to accept that fact? That is a really good question. So I have I've read about abuse survivors. I've talked about the patterns of abuse and the cycle of abuse. I've gone to conferences about this, but when I was in it, I couldn't see it. And I think part of the reason that I couldn't see it was that parts of the relationship were amazing. And we were really good together. We were creative together. We accomplished a lot of really amazing stuff together. And because of that, I didn't want to see that when she flew into a jealous rage and started hitting the wall next to me, when she flew into a rage at a conference and started screaming at me in front of her professional peers, that this was actually mistreatment.
Okay.
It took me a long time to get there. And in fact, there was actually a day early on when I started seeing my therapist when I was talking about something that had happened in the relationship, this thing that Eve had done. And my therapist said, I want to stop you right there. You do recognize that what you're describing was done to you is abuse, right? And I was like, holy shit. And I didn't want to see it. So it took me a while to get there. And as I was starting to see it, I started talking about it on Korah. And then I think the same thing happened as what happened when Eve's ex-girlfriend posted her story, her abuse survivor story. Eve cannot accept that she may have been abusive. She has this huge shame response. I mean, she was so angry.
Do you think there's a conspiracy against Franklin Veaux?
I don't. I think that Eve.
But it sounds like, and look, I'll say this. From reading, I did read all the testimonials, but only after you agreed to do this because I felt like I should like inform myself. I know I'm just a comedian with a fuck show, but it's like I don't know. I could probably try on this one. I could tell that there's clearly some shit between you and Eve that is now not all out in the open. I come from divorced parents. I see stuff. I read things that you said. I read things that you said that like I was skeptical of, and I read stuff, but I also read somewhere in there like there's something here. But even if we took that out of the equation, if we took you and Eve completely out of all of this, there's a lot of stories with overlapping similarities. I frequently say to the Cosby truthers, I'll be like, look, even if 90% of them are lying, it's still like 5-6 chicks the dude finger banged when they were sleeping. So it's like, even if we took Eve out of this, it's like, do you truly believe that there's a coordination of these women lying? Do you believe that they're lying?
No, I do not believe that they're lying. I believe that they are sincere.
Okay.
I believe they are telling the truth, and I believe that they are telling their emotional truth.
So is there
Absolutely.
So taking Eve out of the equation, because like I said, I appreciate and I do believe that there's stuff there that not everyone in that there's some of the stuff's not in that spreadsheet, which is a wonderfully colored. Shout out to Louisa for that color coded spreadsheet. It's a truly poly work of art. The poly people in their spreadsheets are incredible, but. It's like, let's take Eve out of the equation. Like, is there something for you to learn from these stories, from these women that they do believe to be their truth and how they experience things?
Of course there is. Absolutely.
What's something you can take away from that experience, having learned and maybe looking out for?
Be more open with my partners about what's going on with me.
What would be like an example of that?
For example, I tend, as I said, to be non-confrontational. If there are things that I'm noticing in a relationship that are not working for me, I don't say so. And this allows problems to fester and fester and fester.
It just sounds like, it's just so far from talking with you, it just sounds like it's a lot of stuff that happens to Franklin. For the most part. We could take Eve out or keep Eve in. Even just then, it's like, what can you learn from these experiences of women who are sharing their story, their experiences of dating you? And it's a lot of like, oh, I've learned, just now you're like, I've learned I need to speak up when I feel like something's happened to me that I don't like. What about what you do? Because here's something I can relate to. I read your stuff. I read, the snippets of your stuff. I read these stories and I was thinking like, I had 2 really bad public breakups. Mm-hmm. I got banned from 2 play party communities in New York City over one of these breakups. Not for nothing. I didn't really go to those parties. So it was a little weird. It's like, you're banned from a thing you don't go to. I'm like, oh, okay. They were big, bad public. I lost friends over it. I had an ex who sent me a suicidal text message at 6 a.m, and then I called her father, and then she posted on Facebook, like, Billy Procida is telling my family members that I'm suicidal, and then like went on a whole thing. And I'm like, I mean, I have the text here. But even with the things that, I could point at my other 2 partners, my 2 past partners about, I always have maintained I could have been a better boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And I've always been looking out for like, where could I have done better? Because I want to do better for the next person. I hope that I've learned some shit that's helping me be a somewhat tolerable partner to Megan. And should I be fucking up here and should something go wrong, I hope that I'll glean something that will make me a better boyfriend for the next gal. But I'm not hearing anything about what you do. I'm hearing about what happens to you. You sound like a very passive figure in a lot of this. And
that was actually one of Eve's complaints in our relationship, is that I am a passive figure in my relationships.
It seemed like a passive figure. You do wear the bunny ears a lot.
Yeah. And that is true.
He is literally wearing the bunny ears.
I am wearing bunny ears right now. And that is true. I am more passive than active in my relationships. And that puts a lot of stress on my partners, because my partners then have to be the ones who make the decisions, who steer the relationship. I don't advocate for my needs. I tend to, I do not stick up for my partners if my other partners have a problem with them. And that is actually a really big deal. And that was a shitty thing I did from the start of this.
But we're still dealing with things other people are doing. And that's an observation. I'm not going to grill and hammer you until you have a Jack Nicholson, red alert moment or something. I'm just, that's just what I'm noticing in your language use. It's a lot of happens to Franklin, things other people do. How'd the accountability pod go?
The accountability pod has been an interesting experience. And that was another thing that I did, was put together an accountability pod.
Well, you weren't, and I wouldn't have been either at the time, but it's like it was very interesting seeing like your first reaction to the call-in letter. Your first public reaction was not pleased with it, but then the next day you're like, hey, I'm gonna do an accountability pod. So like, what happened? If you could tell us, like, if you would share, how did you feel getting the first call, like the call-in letter initially, and then what happened in between if I may sum it up like this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But what happened between like the fuck this post and the like, I'm going to form an accountability post? Like, what happened in that 24 hours?
What happened was, so when I first got this call in, I was like, oh God, she is doing the same thing that she did to her ex-girlfriend. And I want to put this out there because I don't know if I've believed that I've made this clear or not. I believe that Eve is an abuser. I believe that Eve is physically abusive. I believe that she is emotionally abusive. I believe that she is economically abusive. And I believe that she is verbally abusive. All of these things were things that were in my relationship.
And let me tell you this, I see, and I could see it in the writing, and I saw it in your face in a moment. I believe there's some shit between you and Eve that has not been on the up and up on both sides. And I'll tell you that, I do believe that. And if I had the opportunity to interview Eve, I'd have her here and we'd talk about her too. But I'm more interested talking to you about Franklin. I almost when I was driving up the park, I had a long drive from San Francisco to here. And I was thinking to myself, I don't think the stuff with Eve actually even matters in what I'm most curious about. So I want to let you know, I appreciate that there's some shit going on. Mm-hmm. I believe that y'all have both done some things with each other that have harmed each other. And I almost want to take Eve out of it because there's all these other people involved who clearly have had some experiences, man.
Well, you asked me how I felt.
Okay.
Imagine that somebody hit you and then came forward and said, you abused me, you're a bad person. And so when I first saw this thing, and I left Eve after she hit me, and she did hit me, when I first saw this call out, I was like, oh God, this is her attempting to continue to engage with me. Because when I left, what I tried to do was cut off all contact.
Okay.
And I tried to just cut it off clean. I didn't want to call her out. I didn't want an accountability process. I didn't want a social justice system.
You just wanted.
I wanted her just out of my life. That's done. Boom. So,
which if y'all hadn't written the fucking poly book, the big poly book, probably would have is probably what would have happened.
I don't know, because we started a business together, and a lot of this is actually her trying to push me out of the business. But besides that, and when we wrote the big poly book together, actually, when I first told my Portland girlfriend that I was writing a book with Eve, my Portland girlfriend was like, watch out. If it's successful, Eve is going to try to discredit you and take all the credit for that book.
Why did you say that?
And because Eve was, from the beginning of my relationship with Eve was extremely hostile and abusive to her. That's one of the things I did wrong. I let that happen, and that was shitty. That was incredibly shitty. But anyway, so yes, I got this call out.
Yeah, I guess they call it a call in these days.
Or whatever. Yeah, so I was like, this is a person who has abused me, a person who has mistreated me, a person who has a history of flying into rages, breaking my stuff, going into jealous rages and smashing things. She went into a jealous rage and destroyed my wedding photo with my wife.
So you get the call-in letter and
then
upset.
I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Seriously? And then I was like, okay,
but what's that feeling? What's the emotion? Because you got to be kidding me can be so many different things.
Horror, anger, a little bit of anger, surprise, and just a lot of incredulity. Like, I cannot believe that this person has treated me this way and is now doing this to me. And then I said, okay, maybe there's still something I can learn from this. She's saying, oh yeah, your other partners have these complaints. Mm-hmm. I need to focus on that. I really need to pay attention to that.
That's what you said to yourself.
Yes.
So there was an openness to learning, not from the Eve shit, because like I said, we will at least agree that there's some other shit going on. But you see that there's other people and you're like, okay, what can I glean from them?
Yes. And then I put together the accountability pod, and my accountability pod reached out to her accountability pod. Simultaneously with all of this, there were also ongoing legal issues because Eve is trying to push me out of the company that we co-founded.
Yeah, the divorce going on. There's stuff going on.
Yeah. So then at that point, my lawyer was like, until this legal stuff gets sorted, I want you to have no contact with Eve or anybody in Eve's circle.
When was that about?
That was actually shortly after I put the pod together.
Okay.
So I stopped. I made a couple of posts on Facebook, and then I deleted one of them, and I made a post on Korah, and then I deleted that. And I don't remember exactly what that is, but my lawyer was like, look, you two have an unresolved...
Like, this is how people get fucked over by making posts.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if he was their lawyers, he'd also be saying, hey, everybody, stop making posts.
Yes. So my lawyer said, don't talk about this on social media. Don't engage with Eve. Don't engage with her pod. Don't engage with this social justice process. Don't do anything. Don't say anything until we get this legal stuff sorted out.
Publicly, he says.
Yeah.
And so, I had a really...
She says. My lawyer is a she.
Oh, you know what? They're calling out my sexism. There you go. Good. Thank you. it's something I had a conversation actually yesterday with someone who is familiar with all this process. It's like the accountability pods don't have to, the work itself doesn't have to be public. Just there has to be the transparency that stuff is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So what couldn't you guys have this? Couldn't your lawyer have gone, hey, just cut it out with this publicly and been like, all right, and I'm going to have these conversations with people privately. I'm going to have conversations with my accountability pod members.
Oh, yeah. And those conversations with my accountability pod have been ongoing. In fact, I've had one a couple of days ago. That has not stopped.
Okay.
That has not stopped.
So do you consider yourself still in a process?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
But just not under like their format.
But nobody is talking about it in public, and it is not being controlled by Eve.
Okay.
But yeah, like I said, my pod is still working together, and I talked to them a few days ago. So yeah, I'm still seeing my therapist.
Have any of them told you some uncomfortable truths?
Oh yeah.
Like what?
Like the fact that I'm passive. That's the thing that keeps coming up quite a bit.
Definitely.
Yep.
I see that.
And that is something that I am working to address in all of my current existing relationships. Mm-hmm. They have also reached out to Eve's ex-girlfriend and extended her an apology for the part that I played in Eve discrediting her and having her exiled from the community.
So what from, you express like, I could maybe learn from these other stories of these other women who aren't Eve. Did you end up finding some stuff in there? Did you notice, again, besides the passivity, because I think we're all picking up you're a passive guy and maybe try not to be as much. But is there anything else in all these stories where you noticed a pattern of something you did or that you were, you're
that's
like,
been,
I should look at that.
That has been really, really difficult because as I have been reading that, and I will say that at one point I did actually stop reading the survivor stories because I don't think that they are deliberately setting out to lie. There are things in those survivor stories that are factually, demonstrably untrue.
Okay.
And it is very difficult to read somebody tell what is essentially a falsehood about you.
So what kind of advice would you give someone in a similar position?
Pay attention to the early signs of abuse. If I had done that with Eve, we wouldn't be here.
Okay. What if somebody gets to the point where they get to the call in, the call in, the call out, whatever. They get to that point. What would be your
That
advice?
is a really, really difficult question to answer. And the reason that I say that is that we have moved from, if I can quote my therapist, we've moved from a system where the default assumption was never believe abuse reports to a system where the default assumption is always believe abuse reports.
Which we just saw with Amber Heard and Johnny Depp.
Without ever passing through listen to abuse reports, think about them, engage your brain, and try to find out if they are true or not.
Mm-hmm. A friend of mine, Trina, who she's been on the podcast, and she taught me something that was big that helped me with just exactly that. Because you seem like a very left brain analytical guy. Me as well, very left brain. It's gotten me in a lot of trouble. And something she taught me was that like we can deal with we can emotionally tend to someone who claims that they've been abused or harmed or something like that. And separately from that process, also look objectively, if it was a criminal justice system, investigate, whatever, just however it is, we can look at what objectively happened separate from tending to the emotions of that person. Because like whether, someone says I was raped, if we had a video camera and audio and all this stuff and we could, without beyond a reasonable doubt, be like, this was not a rape, that person still probably... that person still experienced that.
That person has experienced harm.
To be
yeah, exactly.
On those
exactly.
things.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's like I said. It's having so many people. It's interesting to me that hear you say it's not a conspiracy, but they're also not telling the truth.
That not everything they're saying is factually correct. That's not the same thing. And I do believe that many of the things they're saying are true.
What are they saying that's true that you can learn from to be a better Franklin?
Well, a great example is the condom thing. I fucked that up and I own that.
Is there anything about, the type of partners that you end up with?
Oh, yes.
I shouldn't say end up with, because again, these aren't things that happen to you, Franklin.
True.
Like
the partners that I choose.
Yeah.
I have, so a couple of the people in the, who have done these stories self-identify as monogamous. Mm-hmm. Clearly not a good partner choice for me.
Yeah, it seems to be a mistake you made a few times.
Particularly in the time when I was, dating two self-identified monogamous people at the same time. And the fact that you have other partners doesn't necessarily mean that you don't self-identify as monogamous. I don't quite understand that, but there it is. And Celeste was like, she said in her call out, this was not the life I wanted. Yeah. She's right. Yeah. She's right. She wanted a monogamous relationship. She was not a good choice for me. I screwed up.
What makes you look at, meet someone really pretty, you hit it off, you're like, oh, this is a person I want to date. I want her to be a sweetie. And then you find out that they're not. Like, what makes you go, oh, we can make this work?
I don't anymore. And okay. I will never, ever date a monogamous person again. I will never date a person with an anxious attachment style again. Mm-hmm. And that was something that I learned from all of this is not a good match with me. All of the people involved in this call out, anxious attachers.
Mm. It's interesting you mentioned the way the pendulum has swung, right, in society with, how we look at things like Me Too or call outs, allegations, etc. What do you think of some of the situations that have been happening in the public eye? What do you feel like? How do you feel about those situations? I mean,
I feel like for the most part, we have lived in a society for a really, really long time that treats women like shit. Mm. Full stop. Has excused really reprehensible behavior, particularly on the part of men toward women. Mm. Has made a cultural environment where it's easy for men to get away with mistreating women, and has shit on women who said, hey, that dude mistreated me. I absolutely think that has happened. And I think that is something that has very deep roots in contemporary society.
We mentioned the types of partners that you choose. And so clear monogamous ones is cool. What about and this is something I personally am working on. And I think I found my sweet spot with it, but just the idea of like, what is your ethic for dating people or fucking people who, admire you or who are fans of your work? Because, at this point, and even over the last bit of time on LiveJournal, Korah, like I said, hundreds of millions of views, which is insane to me. I wish I had such numbers. Clearly, people see you as, you're Franklin Veaux. Dude, I'll be honest
that's really messed up, and I don't like it.
I didn't even read more than two, not for nothing, but even I've always was like, oh yeah, that's Franklin Veaux. He knows all the poly stuff, right? Similar with Reed Mahawk was like, that's the sex ed guy, right? So there's something about whether or not you want to be in a position of authority. You kind of put yourself there for answering so many questions.
I call things like I see them, and if people like that, they like it, and if they don't, they don't, and it's all cool by me. I don't like the idea of dating a fangirl. Okay. And Eve actually admitted to me after we'd been dating for a couple of years that she started out when we met as a fangirl.
But again, even if we remove Eve, there are other women who share, who
and
are
at the
similar
time,
positions.
Yes, and we're talking about women who have come forward after 25 years. So I was not
Franklin, you sure you
Franklin Veaux.
Franklin, as
25 years ago.
Not your counsel. I want to advise you to not go with they're bringing up things from 25 years ago.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, they're bringing up things from 25 years ago, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying 25 years ago, I was not Franklin Veaux, author of the book.
Sure. But there's also people from 10 years ago and 15 years ago. At that time, you were on LiveJournal a lot, giving advice, like a reasonable person in there who sees like your little stats or whatever is
and
next to your
avatar. And I try very hard
not
not to date people who are fans. I really, really do. In fact, one of my partners ex-partners in Chicago, for example, when we started talking, she had no idea who I was. And I was like, yes, that's awesome. She's never heard of me.
But what do you mean try not to date? Because can't you just choose choose not to?
Absolutely. And somebody who's a fangirl
Which,
now,
by the way,
I
don't think you should have to not date people who are a fan of your stuff. I'm just curious if you had thought through an ethic.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I've decided I don't want to be approaching fans.
Oh God, no!
Right. Well, it's a murky area.
Jesus.
We don't tell rock stars not to do that, right? So I'm just like,
we should.
I don't know. I don't know, but I know that what was going to make me sleep better at night was if people approach me and I'm interested, I'll play around with that and make sure expectations have been managed. But I was like, okay, I'm not going to approach. And I was just curious what,
and
that's something you had.
And for example, I had an experience with a person that I met at a convention, a poly convention, and she flirted with me at the convention. And then we started talking after the convention was over. She got in touch with me online on Facebook Messenger. And and you've actually pointed out, this is a really potentially dangerous situation, and I want you to stop talking to this person.
It's like,
so
yeah,
I
but
did.
she likes me. She's like, oh my God, it's Franklin. Oh my God, it's Billy. I'm like,
Ugh.
yeah. Oh my God, me. I mean, you go, ugh. It does make me go like, oh my gosh, I'm pretty. And then I have to check.
It does not do that to me. It
doesn't.
It feels a little creepy.
I have to check myself on it, but it
there's
feels
this
good.
weird thing that happens because they assume that they know you because they've seen you talk or they've read what you've written. They don't. They don't know you. You can never know a person just through what they write or what they say. And so there's this assumption of knowledge and this assumption of intimacy that is actually, it feels a little creepy. And so I stopped talking to her, and that was a thing that I did wrong. I completely cut her off. I didn't respond to her at all on Messenger, and that hurt her. And that was actually really shitty. And what I should have done was I should have, owned that and taken responsibility for it and said, look, I need to stop talking to you, and here's why. But I'm passive, so I didn't. So I cut them off. And then after I left Eve went to her and was like, oh, Franklin hurt you. He hurt me too. And now they're BFFs, even though Eve was like, you should stop talking to her. So that was a little fucked up. And I managed it really poorly. And I didn't own that, even though Eve was the one telling me to stop talking to her, that I was the one making the decision to do that. And I just left her on red on Facebook, which is crummy and shitty. And yeah, that was kind of a crap thing that I did.
How many partners you got right now?
I am married.
Okay.
And so I have a wife and I have a live-in partner here in Portland.
Okay.
I have a partner who lives in Manchester, and I have a delightful woman that we don't call ourselves partners. We call the thing that we have a situationship rather than a relationship, who lives in London.
That's cute. Popular guy. It seems like you always have a lot of partners.
When your relationships tend to last a really long time, they accumulate.
Yeah. On average, how many, and when we say partner, let's make sure we're speaking the same English language. What's your definition of a partnership?
A romantic partner that I have an expectation of continuity with and a romantic relationship with.
So when I ask you partners, that doesn't even count maybe casual sexual partners?
I don't have any casual sexual partners.
I'm
not into casual sex.
Interesting. Okay.
In fact, I turn down offers of sex a lot more often than I accept them.
Mr. Casanova.
Yeah. But my relationships tend to last 10, 15, 18 years. It is rare that they don't last that long. I think of a partner as a new partner when we've only been together for 5 years.
Right. So it was odd because there was the two gals, the lesbian kittens, the pet lesbians. Right. So that seemed like it was they had only met you the one time, right, or something.
Yeah, I think we've been in the same room twice.
Right. So what was that? Did you consider them partners?
No, they were friends and not interested in men, obviously. Sure. But yeah, no, they were not partners in any romantic or sexual sense of the word.
What's your goal in dating?
Long-term, stable, committed romantic relationships where we create more. I really like creative partners. I really like smart partners. I like partners that I build things with. Co-creation is one of my love languages. The person that I'm in the situationship with in London, we are currently writing several books together.
Are they on poly?
No. Oh no, they're fiction.
Okay, that's smart move.
We have 2 novels coming out next spring, and we have a novel coming out in spring of 2022.
The Man Whore Podcast is sponsored by HotMovies.com. Try out some ethical, paid-for porn for free with none of those hidden fees or secret subscriptions when you sign up at HotMovies.com and use the promo code MANWHORE. All right, so that was my first. That was the first part of my conversation with Franklin Veaux. Just a few notes to make over here. You know, he mentioned the pod members, the accountability pod. I spoke to 2 members of his accountability pod leading up to our interview. From what I can tell, from the pod members, it seems fairly inactive. He claims he talked to them recently, but I spoke to a woman 1 or 2 days before the interview, and she seemed to suggest that it's not as active anymore, but that's all I got. That's the information I got for you. Since this recording, Franklin Veaux has put out a post. He's put out a post addressing Eve's allegations and the Survivor Pod's allegations. Eve has responded, so you can go to Franklin's website to check that out if you want to, and you can read Eve's responses on her Twitter feed at Eve Rickert. That's EVERICKERT. And Franklin's site is tacit.livejournal.com. That's TACIT.livejournal.com. Next week, you will get part 2 of my chat with Franklin. We're going to get into it a little bit more. I would love to know what your thoughts so far, folks. Okay, the email addy is manwhorepod@gmail.com. You can send it all over there. I hope you're following me on the socials. I'm on Twitter at @TheBillyProcida. I'm on Instagram at BillyIsProcida. And we always love it when you go smash that like button on the Man Whore Podcast Facebook fan page. Tomorrow, my $7 and up fan whores are going to be invited to an exclusive monthly Man Whore Munch on the Zooms. Gonna have a little chit chat, gonna hang out, gonna connect with each other. I think we're gonna play a little Never Have I Ever. You can become a member today at patreon.com/manwhorepodcast. Join in time for tomorrow. I think we're starting at 9 p.m. Eastern time. I gotta check, but my patrons know. Stay safe, stay smart, stay sane, everybody, and as always, stay slutty.